You are listening to the Shopify Solutions Podcast, a podcast for Shopify store owners that brings you concrete examples on how to build and grow your e-commerce brand. Your host is Scott Austin. He owns a Shopify agency called Jade Puma. In this podcast, Scott will share his e-commerce insights and best practices with you.
Hey everyone, Scott Austin here, and this week's topic is going to be about cookies and how the changes in cookies coming in the future are going to affect us in our Shopify stores. Now, I'm not a technical expert about cookies and advertising and attribution, so I brought in an expert to talk about this topic, and his name is Jake Levin from Inflection Growth. Welcome, Jake.
Nice to meet you.
So tell us a little bit about Inflection Growth and your background in marketing and digital advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the e-commerce world for the past 13 plus years, and I started my career in e-commerce startups. So I was on the brand side of things, and back in the early 2010s, attribution and cookies were a pretty unknown topic for most people. So it was something that we sort of grew up in and really helped develop over those years through some of these fast-growing startups that I was a part of in the 2010s. As we got into the 2020s, things changed quite a bit between Apple's iOS changes, as well as the way the world changed with COVID and developments on our technology, the way that people use the technology through apps, through sites, and ultimately throughout all of that time, there was huge movement in the space of attribution and cookies. So me going from being in the startup world on the brand side, I moved over into the service side because I learned quite a bit in the first 8 years of my career and first two startups that I had, through scaling those. My first company that I was a part of, I ran marketing at a company called GoPuff for the first 4 years of the business and helped scale it from basically the beginning to over $1 billion in valuation. And as the head of marketing, we were really trying to understand all of the attribution happening across both the app and website in a cookieless world, pretty much. I mean, it was very unknown kind of how you were supposed to do that. So I can touch on how we went about that, and then fast forward to the last 4 years where I've been on the service side, trying to educate businesses and help them through this challenge as they're running, their Shopify stores or their own apps. And what Inflection Growth does is we ultimately help companies navigate all aspects of e-commerce on the marketing side, but ultimately making sure that they're making the right decisions. And that's based on the data that you're getting from a lot of these attribution sources.
Yeah. It's funny. As you're saying that, I'm laughing in my head because I have a client who expects 100% accuracy across all systems when reporting. So the fact that Shopify and Google Analytics and Klaviyo and Google Ads all have slightly different numbers drives him absolutely nuts. And I'm like, it's not a perfect world. You have to understand these systems are doing the best they can, but it's not like we're just counting, pebbles on a beach where it's a finite, discrete thing. It varies a little bit. So it's always a challenge when doing that attribution stuff. So let's take a step back here as we start talking about this cookie topic, and let's explain for the people who don't understand what cookies are, what they are, and how websites use them, first-party cookies, third-party cookies, and those kind of things, so that they have that foundational understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So cookies are a term used for the way that basically sites track your movement across the internet. So the way that I would describe it is that when you enter a site, you're kind of clocking into work, if you will, the old-fashioned clocking into work. So tracking your movement now on the site, where you came from before that, and when you leave, obviously it loses contact. Using that analogy, the work doesn't necessarily know where you go when you leave, but when you come back, it continues to track you again. So it's the continuation of it's the tracking of across different sites and movement around the internet. What users are doing basically.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the third-party cookies are the ones that track you between sites, and the first-party cookie is the one that's tracking you on your site. So, like your customers adding to the cart, that's stored in a first-party cookie. But the fact that Google or Pixel or Facebook has a pixel and it's got information about your customer from other sites. That's a third party cookie. Is that accurate?
Yes, and that's where it gets into a very gray area. As you just mentioned, people get very frustrated when they're not able to properly align attribution models. So you go onto a Meta for your attribution to see how many purchases you might have gotten, compare it to Shopify's data, and it could be very different. Same thing with Klaviyo. It's because obviously with first party data, it being first party, you can trust it to a certain degree, but because they don't first and third party don't line up, and especially since a lot of the privacy changes that have happened over the last couple of years, it's more unaligned than ever. So it can cause a lot of frustration for businesses.
In this world of attribution, it's a very dynamic and fluid situation because the technology and the rules are changing, right? So here in 2025, what are the changes that are happening, and what best practices do people do in the past that may not work in the future?
Privacy laws are continuing to change. And with that, all of the different site tracking that's happening, whether first party or third party, are constantly being put up against the new regulations that are being put out. And therefore, what continues to happen, especially now as things are moving a lot more rapidly than they used to, is that you start to see bigger discrepancies between platforms. So in order to prepare for continual changes, especially in 2025, what it takes is a kind of a multi-platform approach to the way that you look at what's really going on and the way that you attribute customers to certain platforms. Because ultimately, what's happening is all of the the ad platforms are going to try to take as much credit as they can for every purchase, and we've seen that. And if you haven't seen that, you should definitely know that they're going to always try to take as much credit as they can for a purchase. Um, from a first party data standpoint, the alignment that we're seeing the gap gets farther and farther from where it used to be. I back in 2018, 2019, used to be able to kind of get things pretty close, maybe within 10 to 20% accuracy, but the gaps continue to widen since then. So our approach has continued to evolve with that, and we try to not rest on what we used to do as we continue to see the gap between first party and third party data widen.
Yeah, I think in marketing world, like 100 years ago, there was an old saying that said, only half your marketing works, but nobody knows which half. And the promise of the internet was, oh, we're going to know everything, infinitesimal, level of detail. And we're getting back, it seems like, to it's more directional than actual, decimal point accuracy.
I think that's the irony that we talk about internally, is that there was this kind of prime few years where you could get that level of accuracy. But if I've learned anything over the last decade plus in the marketing world, is that every time you get accustomed to something, there's a wrench thrown into it and something changes. So back in the early 2000s, and before that, you had the more traditional style of marketing, because there was not quite the online marketing that's available now. So when you think traditional marketing back in the 90s, you're thinking, billboards, television, radio, etc. And then as Google and Meta came into the advertising world, what's interesting is now those are considered traditional marketing, which is really funny to me to hear companies say traditional marketing like Meta and Google, because for a long time that was considered the newest wave, the thing that was kind of breaking through. But ultimately, it goes to what you're saying, where because there's not exact attribution as there was maybe 7 or 10 years ago, or more accurate attribution because of these changes in the cookie regulations, they are going back to being directional. It is going back to being kind of a somewhat brand awareness slash conversion approach, where I don't think we'll ever get back to where we were in maybe the 90s, where you had to just completely take surveys or do focus groups, things like that, to understand the brand, do brand lift studies, things like that. There still is direct attribution because we have click data, but it's not as accurate as I think people want it to be, or it ever will be again.
Yep. So you had mentioned a multi-platform strategy for attribution. Can you explain what that looks like, and what should Shopify store owners be thinking about as their toolbox for attribution measurement, what should they have in that toolbox? And if they, have a little checklist or whatever, so they can add things that they don't have to it. And how do they, trade off between one another?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we developed our own technique to do this, basically creating a correlation report between what we know is real and what different platforms are telling us. What I'd recommend is, of course, if you're a Shopify store owner and everyone is trying to always be, tight on costs where they can be, is I would always take Shopify's data and take the platform's data, whatever your advertising platform is, if you use one, and compare those two. And Shopify's data as first party data is going to tell you the revenue that you've earned. So you can say that that is real. I know that this customer has come and bought from us. I have their name and address, etc. The advertising platform is not going to have that. So the first step is just to see how far those two platforms are off from each other. I would look over a certain period and see what revenue, let's just say in this case, Meta or Google is. They use the term conversion value, but what conversion value are they attributing to the platform? Because normally they try to attribute all of it. If you're advertising on any of these platforms for long enough, they're going to be able to basically serve ads across the entire audience that you're trying to advertise to, and you should see, is it way less than you're seeing on Shopify? Is it similar? Some cases it's even way more, which I always found wild, and we've seen that across multiple advertising platforms, is that they're attributing more than than Shopify itself. That's step one. That's the simplest way to see how far off are you. And then when you see how far off you are, you basically create a proxy, and you can say, okay, I'm tracking, across this time period, maybe day by day, week by week, month by month. Um, is the platform off in a consistent manner? Is it fluctuating a lot? Is it getting smaller or larger over time? And then based on that, you can start to make assumptions on, okay, I know that it's always off by this percentage. So let me use that as a proxy and say, let me ignore the numbers on Meta. Let me ignore the actual dollar amount it says. I know that that is going to be between 2.5x or 3x of what I'm seeing on Shopify in this example. And then it helps you create a little bit of a better gauge directionally of what you're going to see. Now that's kind of level one. For us, we're also looking across multiple other attribution channels that we subscribe to. So there's a lot out there. There's ones that have their own proprietary pixels that you have to integrate into both your Shopify site and put into the UTMs on the ad platforms. And then there's ones that, especially if you're using apps, you'll have to install SDKs. They're a little bit more advanced. There's always also new technologies coming out that integrate things outside of the digital world, whether it be, well, not outside the digital world, but include geofencing. If you're using an omni-channel approach and you have retail, they're also incorporating retail store data. You can kind of go down a rabbit hole with it, but the first level would be comparing platform data to Shopify or whatever e-commerce platform you're using. And then the second level would be starting to incorporate some of these proprietary technologies that are out there that are, have their own way, their own special sauce of doing attribution.
Now, you didn't mention GA in there. Do you factor that into the tool set, or do you just not use GA at all?
We went from it's interesting because when attribution was the closest to on the e-commerce platform and the ad platform, GA was our source of truth because they were pretty close, and we could say, okay, GA, solve the difference. Which are you closer to? We're going to trust GA. GA, I think, Google Analytics suffered among the most of any platform from, the iOS 14 changes that came out. And we literally saw a complete decrease in usage on our end from the day that happened until now, where we do not use it at all because GA's failures have basically now sprung into the market all of these new attribution tools. Before these iOS privacy laws came into place or policies came into place, before some of the new cookie regulations came into place, GA was the source of truth, and now from our perspective, it's basically useless.
Wow, that's disappointing since I love my Google Analytics scorecards that I built for my client. But that is what it is. So what I hear you saying is Shopify is the most accurate, although it's not 100% accurate, and you use Shopify as the foundation to, in your head or on a pad of paper if you need to, have a ratio number. Like Facebook is 80% accurate or 20% accurate or whatever, and then you just use that when you're looking at your ROI numbers or something like that. What sort of variance can I expect to see? Like you mentioned, I think 2.5 times Facebook being off by. Like, what's the range of inaccuracies or variances between the datas that people can see? Because what a lot of store owners that I talk to, they look at it like they think something must be wrong, right?
Yep.
What I want to know is like, what's the normal variance you're going to see? So it's not you, it's them. And then like, what's the sign that maybe you've got something set up wrong?
Yeah. Do you mind if I go back for a second? Because
Yeah, go for it.
as far as GA, I want to pedal that back a little bit, because one, if you use GA a lot with your clients, I don't want to go out saying that it's useless. Our team's not a fan of GA4, and we think that they went in the wrong direction on a lot of stuff. And we use platforms like Triple Whale, Northbeam, Rockerbox, which are very expensive. So to adjust that statement, I would say that GA is useful if you don't want to pay for one of those tools as a third source of truth. So you can use Shopify, the platform, and GA and see how they all compare and do a correlation analysis, is what we call it, a correlation analysis on pretty much how does each compare to the actual sales that are happening and the money that's being spent. But we do find some of these paid tools to be a lot more correlated, a lot more accurate, which, you do get what you pay for to a certain degree.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah. So as far as the discrepancies we'll see, it can really vary based on store. So when we compare, let's just say, one of these attribution tools to a Meta's data and Shopify, and we look day by day over a 30-day period of when did revenue come in, let's just say new customer revenue come in, how much did we spend on that day? And we'll also do it on a week-to-week basis, because of course a dollar spent today doesn't necessarily equal a purchase that day. It can have a lagging effect. And we're always taking into consideration a buying cycle of any given company. But just to keep it simple, if we're looking day by day or week by week and comparing those three platforms, whether it's GA or a paid tool, we do find that Meta, it can be the most closely correlated in some instances. If we're consistently month over month finding that Meta for this given company is the most correlated, then we might actually recommend that they not pay for the tool anymore, or they actually trust Meta. That makes us happy. We have nothing wrong with these platforms. We would love if they were more accurate, because then it makes optimization a lot more simple. So it really depends on the situation, because the variance can be quite a bit. And I think what's important for companies to know is that it's very fluid. So if you're not consistently looking at this, you might be resting on your laurels because you found that this platform is the best at predicting what is actually going on, or is the best correlated to your Shopify data. But 6 months later, it could be a completely different case. So my recommendation is to continue to look at it month by month and assess which tool is the most accurate. And I'm always saying to our team as well, it's not about this tool is the voice of truth and everything else is false. It's about ordering the priority in which you look at them. So if we're looking at, for example, GA, Meta, and Shopify CAC, all three will have an acquisition cost or ROAS, whatever you're looking at. I'm not just going to say to our team or any of our clients, don't look at this channel or that channel, but I'm going to say, we're going to weight this channel 50% of our decision making, the second one 30, and the third one 10. And that's where you get into attribution modeling, which ultimately that's where the art comes in. The art and science kind of meet when you come into that modeling and how you decide to model.
So the whole goal here is to make good business decisions on data in a world where data's muddy. And I can totally see, as you're saying, that's where the art comes in, because everything's fluid and dynamic. So it's changing and you got to just wrap your head around it on an ongoing basis. How does one become an artist in that world, or at least an amateur artist?
Well, first is to see either your own store's data over a period of time, talk to other people, other businesses in similar segments and ask them kind of what they've seen. And then third is obviously from our end, we're able to look across a lot of different businesses, over years and see what's going on side by side with these businesses, which is why I think that it's always helpful to get perspective from either companies or people that have worked with a lot of different types of businesses or a lot of businesses in a particular segment. But I do think that with the actual art behind it, there is similar to any art, there's techniques that people use, and there's no right or wrong technique. Ultimately, the goal here is to make the best decision with the dollar in front of you. Do we spend it on this platform or that platform? Do we spend it on this ad or that ad, this campaign or audience or that? So ultimately, our job as marketers has become and really has always been, how can we best spend the next dollar to make sure that it's most likely to bring us back, return on that dollar. So so basically it's going to vary based on marketer, and different performance marketers will have their own methods, but it always will come back to how's the next best dollar spent.
Yeah, and the challenge in this space for, because most Shopify stores are really, really small, and there's really big ones out there, right? So most of them, are, struggling to keep their head around everything that's going on. And what I hear you saying is ads, there's no set it and forget it in ads. Is that accurate?
Of course, as a performance marketer, I would love to say that no, there's no such thing as set and forget it. However, there are companies out there that can put an ad up and it's a really good ad. And in today's world, I think more than ever, creative is king. A lot of the ad platforms have now instituted these sort of all-encompassing campaigns that are heavily focused on automation. So whether you're in Meta and you're using Advantage Shopping, or you're in Google and you're using PMax, these are meant to commoditize what performance marketers have traditionally done. So, obviously to make a incremental difference than someone just going in, who's never used the platform before and putting up an ad, that's where you have to get really technical with the testing strategy, the understanding of the audience, the branding, the creative that you're using, and ultimately the what we're talking about, the understanding of the attribution, so that you're not just burning money. Because I'll have one person say to me, "Hey, I've been just running this stuff myself because I'm a DIY type of person, and it's yielded great results." But then one day it stops yielding results and they start to freak out. And then they come to some sort of consultant or agency and they say, "Hey, figure it out for me." On the flip side, there's people who put up an ad and it just burns through money and they feel jaded to these platforms because they said, "I tried it, it didn't work." And I hear that all the time. "Hey, I tried that, it didn't work." So I think, ultimately it's a very fluid situation. And what I've found as my career has gone on is that, the most difficult thing about being a marketer is that every single day, month, and year is constantly evolving. So what is challenging about what we do is that we have to continue to be innovative every day. And we're only as good as our last month's
Yep.
performance or our last day's performance. So I would say to people out there who want to, try advertising, these platforms are set up to not be so difficult to work with. You can watch a YouTube video and set something up yourself, but I would not expect that you can set it and forget it. It's going to work forever. Maybe you'll get some success for a certain period of time, but at some point, it's at least what we've seen, it's going to start to see diminishing returns. And at that point, you have to have a more well-baked strategy and understanding of how the entire funnel works in order to continue to see success.
Yeah, I totally understand your answer. It personally drives me nuts. Not that that's your answer, but the fact that that's the truth, right? Is it's so dynamic. It's always moving. It's sort of like, on my side where, I help my clients build Shopify stores. Things I used to worry about 4 years ago, I never think about anymore. And I think about a whole different set of problems now as the platform has solved the old problems and introduced new problems that I have to solve for my clients. And it's like, just because I learned it before doesn't mean it's going to be good tomorrow. And I have to learn new things tomorrow. So I totally get it. Just it's so frustrating in this world of technology that that's the truth, but that is unfortunately the truth, and that's what we in this space have to realize is we're only as good as our mastery of the tools, and that mastery is an evergreen, ongoing process that you have to stay on top of. Just like
Yeah.
SEO marketing, they have to think about it every time Google rolls out a new update. They've got to change all their best practices and all their strategies.
Building trust in your store is essential, but let's be honest. Most trust badge apps make your store look worse, not better. Their badges clash with your brand and give your store a Frankenstein-like feel. That's why we built Badgezilla, the Shopify app that delivers trust badges that seamlessly match your brand. Originally crafted for our private clients, Badgezilla was so successful we turned it into an app for every Shopify store. With Badgezilla, you'll access hundreds of badges, all customizable to your brand guidelines, making them a natural part of your customer experience. Place badges on product pages, collection pages, the home page, and more. Take it a step further with conditional logic. Show a Made in Canada badge only on products made in Canada, or tailor badges to highlight your unique selling points. And the best part, Badgezilla comes with a robust, always free plan so you can start building trust risk-free. Transform trust into conversions with Badgezilla.
Yeah, and back I want to say between 2017 and 2020, that 3-year period, I remember personally feeling like I had a big leg up on this attribution stuff that a lot of people still didn't know anything about. Investors didn't know about. Shopify wasn't very popular at that time. It was still in its infancy. So for companies out there that were in the e-commerce world or in the business world, there was pretty accurate attribution, and it was something that a lot of companies didn't know. So it was a big leg up. Once everything caught up and has changed and evolved, you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, I was once ahead of the game and an expert in this thing, but now I'm no longer. And how do I figure out how to be an expert and a leg up in the next thing? And as daunting as it might feel, that's I look at that as like that's a lifelong journey that I continue to have to do over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like every time Shopify solves a problem I used to solve, like that doesn't put me out of work because they just introduce new things that I have to become an expert in. And like you're saying, you're always staying ahead of the curve, and it is frustrating, but it is like you're saying, if you're going to be in the e-commerce space or anything in the digital space, that is the world we live in today. It is constantly fluid and dynamic, and we have to stay fluid and dynamic and respond to that. So, is there anything about this attribution, especially for Shopify stores, that store owners should be thinking about that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, there's external forces that everybody should always think about and understand that our company that works with a lot of different size Shopify stores, from just started yesterday to companies that are doing $50 to $100 million through Shopify. And what's interesting is everyone always has the same attitude. They owners expect their business to go up to the right all the time, and any marketer will know the struggle of that. And two, there's this complex that I feel like a lot of business owners think that everything's only happening to them. So we do some therapy with our partners where we're saying, hey, this tariff situation has thrown the entire economy through a loop. So that's going to impact demand. You have a change in political parties that's going to have a demand, a change in demand in the U.S. There's external forces, there's seasonality, there's a lot of factors outside of what's in your tiny kind of bubble or your segment or your industry that will impact overall performance. And not to crucify your marketers for performance that might be out of everyone's control. Second would be to continue to understand what tools are out there. I think with with Shopify and with e-commerce, to me, there's three sections that people have to keep in mind that are all kind of tied together through cookies and attribution. The first is your product and your website. So your prices have to make sense. People have to be willing to buy your product at the price. Your website has to be able to perform well and up to standard. And I think those things obviously go without saying, but you'd be shocked at how little people focus on the experience when someone actually gets to the site. And they could be wasting a lot of money or impressions on people who aren't having a good experience, or the product isn't appealing to them for XYZ reasons. And then they're blaming it on the advertising when ultimately it's more of a site experience issue. Second is your media mix and how you're actually going out and talking to people across what channels. And we've talked about how you might track the performance on those channels, understand is it working, is it not, how much of the revenue is it really driving. That's really important because no one wants to waste money. And then third, and I think it's something that needs to be focused even more on in 2025 with some of the commoditization of these platforms, is creative. Because there's AI being kind of introduced across all three of these categories of what I just mentioned, and in creative too. But you still have to talk to people. You still have to reach their emotions enough to convince them to take an action on something. And as good as AI is and will continue to become, you have to understand how to bring these three things together to have a really good company. And obviously the data that's coming through, the click data, cookies, attribution is kind of tying all three of these elements together.
You're painting a bleak picture here, Jake, which is just reality. When I think about e-commerce stores, right, as you're talking about the way that people think, and I love what you said, where a lot of times store owners think it's them, and I do the same thing. Like, no, it's not you. It's the platforms doing this to you right now. Everybody's having the same kind of problems here. The way I think about it is a successful e-commerce brand has to be, their core competency has to be marketing. They have to be experts in how to talk to their customers, find their customers, acquire their customers. And too many of them, in my mind, focus on their product too much and not their customer acquisition enough, which means in my mind that the store owner should be thinking about these problems. It's not the kind of thing that they can offhand to somebody else to solve for them. They may absolutely bring in an agency to do that work, but they have to understand these things and these dynamics so that when your agency's telling you X, Y, and Z, technical detail, blah, 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 you understand those things, because that understanding of your business is essential to your being successful and differentiating from your competition, because it's the marketing that makes the big e-commerce brands the big e-commerce brands. Like Gymshark didn't become Gymshark because they had the best clothing for the gym. They became Gymshark because they had the best marketing for clothing for the gym.
Yeah. Gymshark's a good example. You have to strike a chord with a group of people. You have to know how to talk to them. There's obviously, ways that companies have gone about that. And I think that, that's going into marketing strategy is obviously a whole different topic, but I don't think it's too bleak of a picture. I think the companies that we've worked with that are doing well have good products and they have good marketing. And
Yep.
It's, I think that back in the early 2020s, during COVID, talking about 5 years ago, and there was this period between 2020 and 2022 that kind of curses me. because it just everything worked. There was this period of time where
Yep.
everyone was just sitting at home, and they just turned on a company, and next thing you know, it's a $20 million company. And the reason that I say it cursed me is because I was obviously a marketer during this period, and I was working at the time with a bigger agency in New York, and I had just come from startups that we had a really complex funnel. We had kind of a full marketing plan that was more kind of traditional. And I remember going in and it's that business and saying, okay, here's the way we want to approach all of our new businesses coming in with this, funnel approach. And I remember so vividly, he said, hey man, just turn on a conversion campaign and call it a day, and just that it just works. And
Yep.
I was kind of blown away, but there was that period of time where it did. And nowadays, we're being approached by companies all the time that are saying, during that period of time we are doing X amount of dollars, some big amount of dollars, and since that period it's either stayed flat or it's gone down.
Yep.
And they're very frustrated about that. They don't know how to get back to that.
The way I think about this evolution that you're talking about, where what used to be easy is now hard, and it's true in every single step, every single year, right? When the 4-hour work week was written, basically the whole premise of the book is if you spend all the effort to create a server, to create an e-commerce store, you're going to be rich and not have to think about anything. And that was totally true in 2007 because nobody had a server and it cost a ton of money to get one set up and you had to create software and all that kind of stuff. And then, all the SaaS companies came around like Shopify and BigCommerce and the rest of them. And now you didn't have to set up a server anymore. So that wasn't your strategic differentiator. Now you had to design a website and connect to certain things. And then, so to be competitive was less hard, or to be in the game was less hard. And it made the competition more. So more and more people came on board. And what I saw happen in 2020, like you saw in COVID, is all the online or all the offline only stores came online for the first time in COVID because their offline store was closed down. So let's just say there were X number of online stores pre-COVID. During COVID and after COVID, that number was 1.5, 2 times, whatever. So all of a sudden, the competition out there was exponentially larger, and it meant you had to be that much smarter and more sophisticated to stand out and differentiate. So things that used to be a differentiator in 2019 are table stakes in 2025, and
Right.
now you've got to figure out your 2025 differentiator. And the second you do, or the second anybody does and publishes it on the internet, it goes from being differentiator to being table stakes
Yes.
really, really quickly. So you're always evolving, always learning, always being scrappy, always doing things differently.
The being a marketer is not for the faint of heart. I feel like the impression when I was younger and going through school was that marketing was Mad Men, and you sit around and smoke cigars and drink whiskey and talk about what the billboard's going to say. But I think now it's among the most dynamic fields out there, and it's why companies have started to respect it a lot more, because ultimately it used to be the finance department or the product department that was the do or die. I think now for a lot of companies, it's the marketing is whether the company is going to succeed or not is ultimately depending on that. And I think you said it perfectly. Every year things move faster and faster. So now it's the more innovative you are, the faster that people will catch up. So so our job as marketers is to obviously help businesses learn what we've learned, and to wake up every day and stay up to date on what's going on, test new things. Also not be ignorant and not say, hey, that doesn't work, we tried that before, because some things come back and they didn't work, then they work again and then stop working again. But it's a constantly iterative process, and it can be frustrating for sure sometimes, but it's also fun. I'm honestly a bit happy that it's not the time anymore where everything works, because I would come across a lot of companies where I would think in my head, man, this company should not be worth $50 million. And and then a few years later, you see that company is no longer around, and you
Yep.
kind of are thinking, all right, there's a bit of things are a bit back in their place, and it's not this crazy world where everything just explodes out of nowhere, and it kind of anyone can do it. Of course, as professionals, we want to think that the time we've put in has yielded us some privilege in saying, okay, we know a bit and we're able to help companies grow. Um, it's not so fun when it feels like anybody who has some odd idea can just put it up onto Shopify and it becomes $100 million company, which for a little bit of time there, it seemed like, the most obscure businesses and the most obscure things were coming out of nowhere, raising a ton of money. And a lot of them have fallen by the wayside. And obviously you don't wish that on anyone, but there are some companies that come to mind where they had their nose up in the air and they thought they knew everything, and then once um, once the dust settled on everything and the economy changed, suddenly they're nowhere to be found.
Yeah. So what I like about this conversation is you're just reminding me of my personal belief, and I think I said it earlier, is that the strategic differentiator for an e-commerce store needs to be their customer acquisition strategy. And it's not just marketing; it's the whole customer acquisition side of it. And this is just another explanation of why brands need to think about that and focus their energy on that and give it the right weight against all the other things they have to do also.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, um, you obviously have to have a good product market fit. You have to know how much to charge
Yep.
for it. With we usually estimate that a healthy company should be, it's going back to what we were talking about with attribution. We think referral for a fast growing company or a healthy growing company should be 20 to 30% or more. Once you get to a more mature stage, you're looking at maybe a 50% referral to brand new customer, because of course the brand awareness is there. But
Yep.
yeah, if your product's not good or the price is not aligned, then you're not going to get referral, and you're going to run out of the low hanging fruit, if you will, the quick customers to acquire, and not going to have good retention. So I would say that if you're a store that has a retention based product, subscription product, then I would actually say that the product itself is going to have a bit more of an impact on the store's performance, because people have to really like it to continue to subscribe to it. If you're not a subscription based product, then I definitely agree that the product has to be good, the product market fit has to be good, but ultimately a good acquisition strategy and understanding of your market, connection with the consumer is ultimately going to win out. Which to you bring up Gymshark. I mean, Gymshark made products very similar to a lot of other companies, but they were able to ultimately beat them out and become a big brand because they had a really good acquisition strategy. And I know some of the people there, and um, you know they did a really great job of um, finding the right segment and talking to them in the way that they should be talked to.
Yep. Yep. It's amazing to me how well sophisticated brands know their customers. It's also amazing to me how many mediocre brands don't understand their customers at all. So,
A lot of founders think their customers are different than their customers actually are. I mean, there's a
yes.
lot of there's a lot of brands, especially think about maybe in the fashion space, where they want to be some prestige brand and compare themselves to these expensive brands that've been around for a while, and they're not willing to spend the money or the time in order to develop a brand that can be considered on that same platform. So they get frustrated, but ultimately, if you're making high end clothing, for example, and you're trying to compare yourself with a brand that's been around for decades and has put millions, if not more, into the marketing and the product, and you just expect to overnight be able to compete with them, then you're on a foolish mission. So I find that a lot of founders also need to look at data to understand of what their who their customer is, because oftentimes they have this idea in their head, but um, when they go out and sell it, ends up being a different group of people that actually are buying the product.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And that comes back to the attribution we're talking about, like knowing what's working, what's not, and having the data that drives that. So I appreciate your time today on this. This was actually insightful for me. Is there anything, any last wisdom you want to leave with people before we sign off?
Yeah, I think that again, our approach to attribution in this crazy cookie world is that you have to be able to take a lot of different data sources and put them next to each other and piece a puzzle together. Because ultimately, the art and the science are about understanding data, but also putting a picture together and a story together that makes sense for that business. I urge people to not turn a blind eye to surveys, old-fashioned surveys. I don't recommend that companies use, for example, post-purchase surveys exclusively because there's, of course, many issues with that. There's survey bias. There's, not enough data, for example, that you're going to get from like an ad platform or something like that. But I do think it's helpful to incorporate what the consumer actually has to say themselves into your attribution picture that you're trying to paint. And it can be really interesting when you start to incorporate that data. And does it align completely with what you're seeing? Is it completely different? Sparks interesting conversations that can then lead to better testing, that can then lead to better decision making.
Excellent. I like that. Now, if people need some help, figuring out that puzzle, how do they reach out and find you?
Yeah, sure. So feel free to visit our site. You can see some of the work we've done, some of the different types of marketing that we do. Our website's inflection.marketing. And beyond that, we can, can I just do that again real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Question for you is like, can you list like an email?
Whatever you give me, I'm going to put in your show notes.
Right? Show notes. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you say, find me on LinkedIn, email me, website, I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, I like to get I'll give my personal email just to be a bit more personable, so that people don't think they're going to like some random inbox.
Yep.
So
that's a nice touch. I like that.
Yeah. So
and I always keep that simple, by the way. I'm always like jpuma.com, and I don't need to tell you my Instagram, my Facebook, and all that kind of crap. But that's my personal way of doing things. So
yeah.
But go ahead, answer that question again, which is, how can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to visit our website. You can see some of the work we've done, all of the different types of marketing that we work on as well. The website's inflection-marketing.com. And if you'd like to reach out personally, I'll give you my personal email so that you're not, going to some general email mailbox. So my email is jake@inflection-growth.com. Feel free to reach out with any questions you have, or if you need support.
Excellent. I'll include those in the show notes for anybody that wants to reach out to Jake. Thanks for sharing your time with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Shopify Solutions Podcast with Scott Austin. This podcast is brought to you by Jade Puma, a Shopify-focused agency located in San Diego, California. If you like what you heard, please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to work with Scott on your brand, email him at scott@jadepuma.com.